Greetings, Gilliam the Rogue here, once again, back with an Elder Scrolls Online Let's Talk segment. Today we will be continuing the Nightblade skill lines with the Shadow skill line. This skill line will deal primarily with more utility, however it will also offer the Nightblade, both Magicka and Stamina, some very heavy hitting abilities, whether they be single target or AoE. This skill line is really cool. It's going to allow the more roguey personality of the Nightblade to come to life. It's going to deal a lot with, as the name implies, shadows. So invisibility, being kind of stealthy, outplaying your opponent, being very tricky, stuff like that. So this is a lot of the utility that comes to mind when you think of a really hard to get target. So when utilized in tandem with our assassination, siphoning, and other skill lines, this is going to make the Nightblade feel unique in a lot of different aspects. We're going to get a really cool spammable for stamina DPS in PvE and PvP. There will be a Magicka stamina spammable option for melee PvP Mage Nightblade. So there's a lot of really cool stuff in this skill line. So let's start things right off with our passive abilities. Our first passive ability is referred to as Refreshing Shadows, and this is a really simple passive, and what it's going to do is it's going to increase our health, stamina, and Magicka recovery by 15% across the board. So all three of these regen stats will all get a 15% bonus. Really, really simplistic. The one thing to keep in mind, though, is that percent regeneration amps or recovery amps do not apply to other percent amplification amps. So, like, Refreshing Shadows will not stack multiplicatively, at least, with major endurances. Like, if I had the 15% stamina recovery from Refreshing and 20% from Endurance, I'm not going to get a multiplicative bonus where it's applying all together, rather an additive bonus. So it's not nearly as potent as it seems, especially when used in tandem with light or medium armor, because both of these skill lines have a lot of regen in them. So for me, right now, my base regen only comes from armor, so like set bonuses that give stamina regen, so Bone Pirates. It will also apply to drinks, so I'm using no drink at the moment, and I have 1,033 stamina, but I also have some CP spent, so this is not stacking with Mooncalf or anything. It is additive, but yeah, it's not as powerful as it seems. It's actually just as strong as all of the CP nodes put together. So if you had Arcanist, Mooncalf, and Healthy all together, that's pretty much what it is. And if you know, those CP nodes aren't really that effective these days after the Morrowind reworks to CP, because it's only 15%. You're not getting a tremendous amount of regeneration, and this is not what makes the infinite dodge roll builds that you'll often see out there these days, or infinite sustain with Magicka or health that even. It's a very nice passive, but it's not that OP. Next is Shadowberry, a very powerful utility passive that allows which allows the Nightblade to gain sources of major ward and resolve whenever we activate a shadow ability. And it's really cool. I'll just read what it says. It grants us major resolve in ward for 6 seconds, that's the base, increasing our physical and spell resistance by 50 to 80. This is 8% damage reduction, regardless of if we're being attacked by a player or an NPC, so that's a nice way to get some hardy damage resistance, and since it's physical and spell from resolve and ward, that's 8% damage across the board mitigation. However, this duration will be increased by 25% for every piece of heavy armor we wear. So if we see 6 seconds right now is what I have, but if I activate this, it lasts about 8 seconds, a little bit more than 7 seconds, because it's getting a 25% duration because I have one piece of heavy armor equipped. So it'll say your current bonus, which will reflect based on how many pieces of heavy armor you gain. The tooltip, unfortunately, does not update in terms of duration. You have to have like a buff tracker like FTC, Surrendar, something like that will allow you to see the duration. But again, we see it lasts longer than the 6 seconds that it mentions. So it's a really nice way, and it will help tank Nightblades especially get more indefinite sources of major resolve and ward, especially since most of these skills in this tree will not be used as a spammable for a tank. For the Stamina and Magicka Nightblade, however, there is a very powerful spammable ability in here for us that will be proccing Shadow Barrier, giving us a lot of mitigation in both PvE and PvP context. So it's a really nice little buffer, helping the Stamina and Magicka Nightblade just be tankier across the board. And it also really helps out the tank Nightblade keep up those sources without having to interact with other things like having to wear Chuden or something of the sort. So it's a really nice passive. Next is Dark Vigor, another very simplistic passive. All this does is for each shadow ability we have slotted, we're going to gain 3% max health. And similarly to the regeneration, this will apply to our base. So this is not going to look at other percent amplifications. So it won't look at the 20% bonus we get from CP. If you're an Imperial, it's not going to look at that. If you're using Undaunted, it's not going to look at that. It's going to just apply to your base. So whatever you're getting from gear set bonuses and from attribute points. So stuff like that, that will scale with Dark Vigor, getting a little bit more tankiness out of this, and it stacks per shadow ability slotted. So in PvE context, Stamina Nightblade always has one shadow ability, Veiled Strike Amorphed. Magicka Nightblade will have a Path of Darkness morph, however it's going to be on their back bar, so it's kind of for them. Tank Nightblade's definitely going to be using at least 1 or 2, maybe even 3 of these skills. However, they're usually going to be on their back bar, but as a tank you have a lot of freedom, so really nice way to get some extra health and efficiency for your health stats. So less dying, hooray hooray. Relatively simplistic passive. I would like to see Dark Vigor work more like Refreshing Shadows, where it gave maybe 2% max health, stamina, and magicka for every shadow ability slotted to sort of help incentivize using a little bit more of these skills. Like maybe, hey, I'm running PvE and yeah, maybe Summon Shade isn't the best thing for a DPS, but maybe I'm getting a little bit of extra stats out of it and I'm a solo player, so I have a little bit more reason to run it. Just a little bit extra icing on top of the cake, because some of these are actually not that great as cake, especially in PvE content. Most of this skill line will be utilized really well in PvP, but not so much in PvE. So I would really like to see something small, not extraordinary, done with Dark Vigor to kind of help incentivize some of these skills a little bit and just give a tiny little boost to Nightblades in general, because they could definitely use some help right now. And then our last passive is called Dark Veil, and another really basic passive. And all that's going to do is increase the duration of any shadow ability or buff that it grants us by 15%. The only exception to this is it will not apply to Shadow Barrier. So that 15% duration, for whatever reason, doesn't apply to Shadow Barrier. That's one thing that I'd like to see done. It should obviously be additive and not multiplicative of Shadow Barrier. So just have that 15% apply to whatever the secondary effect is of Shadow Barrier after other things. So really simplistic. So let's say I had Heavy Armor and Dark Veil. So instead of just having 25%, I'd have 40%. In terms of duration. So I think that'd be really nice. But otherwise, it's just going to help increase the duration of these skills. So it'll apply to the duration of Consuming Darkness. It will apply to the duration of Veiled Strikes off balance, as well as one of their secondary effects on a buff. We'll get to that in a sec. It'll apply to Shadow Cloak, Path of Darkness, the CC of Aspect of Terror, and Summon Shade's duration. So it's a really efficient passive. It's nice that it applies to everything, because a lot of times, many classes, these sort of passives are kind of buggy and they don't apply to everything that you'd think they will. So it's a really nice way to help the duration of some of these abilities, which helps a lot, especially with Cloak. More freedom, more versatility in terms of being able to traverse the field, extra duration on one of our AoE dots, extra CC, extra duration on Shade. Like, it's really nice. But now let's move into our active abilities. So our first active ability is called Veiled Strike, a very simplistic ability. It's going to cost magicka at base, meaning it'll scale with max magicka, spell damage, spell critical, and spell penetration as it deals magic damage. Furthermore, it's going to scale with spell erosion, elemental expert, Elfborn, and Master at Arms in the CP system as it is direct damage. What it's going to do, it's going to have a 5 meters target range. It's very, very short, so you're going to have to be in the face of the opponent. Magicka or Stamina, depending on the morph you take. It is very, very melee-eccentric. Furthermore, when attacking with Veiled Strike or morphs, while sneaking or invisible, this ability will stun the enemy and set them off balance for 4.6 seconds. So, what that means is we're going to get a stun for 4.6 seconds across the board. So if they're not CC immune, they're not CC breaking, and they don't have anything that reduces the duration of crowd control effects, this is going to be almost 5 seconds of locking our opponent in place. So draining resources of our opponent is going to be a very rewarding source of damage and just the ability to annihilate them from a PvP aspect, because 5 seconds of CC is really, really strong. You can pretty much kill a lot of players in 5 seconds as long as they're not a tank. So that's a really, really powerful passive that's added onto Veiled Strike, helping the Nightblade feel very roguish, attacking in and out of stealth like a guerrilla warfare tactic. So coming in, dealing damage, stunning the opponent, retracting as they CC break or whatever. So it's a great way to keep up some pressure, allowing the Nightblade to stay out of harm's way because we are a very fragile class. But now let's look at our morphs. And our first morph is called Surprise Attack, and this is going to rework the ability into a stamina ability. So it'll cost stamina, weapon damage, so it'll cost stamina, but it's going to scale with stamina, weapon damage, weapon critical, and armor penetration, since it will deal physical damage now. Furthermore, since it does that, it will scale with mighty, piercing, precise strikes, and master at arms in the CP systems, because it's still going to be direct damage. So what the added benefit of this is it scales better for stamina builds, more DPS, more raw damage in PvP, hooray. And it'll also apply major fracture to our target for 13.8 seconds, but that's with our passive that increases the duration, that Dark Barrier or the Dark Veil passive. So that is the reflected tooltip. 13.8 seconds, very helpful. This will go up in duration. I believe that it'll cap out at 17.6 seconds at rank 4. So that's a great way to get some extra utility in solo play. However, in like PvE context or something, a tank is going to apply that merely by taunting. So it's not that amazing in terms of operational DPS to a raid. However, in PvP, you're not going to have a tank with you, right? They're not going to be debuffing the target all the time with like piercing target, because you can't taunt players in PvP. So it's very effective there. And then in like solo target or like doing Maelstrom Arena or doing overland content, it'll be very helpful in giving us a lot of damage. In terms of PvP damage, the mitigation effectiveness is 8% in PvP and 10.5 or 10.56% in PvE. So in terms of DPS, that doesn't mean you're going to gain those values. It means that they're going to be mitigating less damage. So it's going to be a percent of a percent, and we're actually going to see more damage out of this than those values. So in PvE, you're going to get more than 10.56% damage against that target unless they are going from 5280 to 0. But if they're above 5280 and they're still going to have some, your damage will go up more than that value. And same in PvP. So it's actually very, very potent. It's going to retain that attacking with Surprise Attack while sneaking invisible, sets them off balance, and stuns them for that 4.6 seconds. So it's really, really strong. This is going to proc that Major Warden Resolve for us for a Stamina Nightblade in PvE or PvP, helping get tankier. Really, really powerful in terms of what it does. It's going to give that 3% health for slotting. Just phenomenal, phenomenal ability. Next is Concealed Weapon, and this is going to retain that Magicka scaling, so Magicka spell damage, all that great stuff, still going to have that 5 meters range, still going to deal the same damage as Veiled Strike. However, what this is going to do is add a passive augment to the ability, so whenever you have this slotted, when you're sneaking or invisible, you're going to gain 22% movement speed, and this is going to stack with other sources. So back in the day, this used to give like Major Expedition, and it wasn't that great, but now it's going to give a unique movement speed buff that will stack with other things, allowing us to be extremely quick in stealth or invisibility, especially when paired with Cloak on like a Magicka Nightblade. You will have a lot of mobility, which is the Nightblade strength, because we don't have that raw beefiness to be able to go toe-to-toe with a lot of these high-pressure classes like a Stam Sork or a Dragon Knight or something of the sort. We're not able to tango with them because we don't have the same mitigation or defenses that they have, so we need to utilize mobility more. So entering cloak, covering a large distance, getting to safety, pelting them from a distance, entering cloak while they try and come to us, and doing the same. So utilizing that movement speed is really, really the Nightblade's strength. So concealed weapon can even be used on some stamina Nightblade builds if they're having different spammables or using different abilities instead. So this is usually tailored to gank builds if you're using this with stamina Nightblades, but most of the time you'll be using surprise attack because it's just really, really efficient. So let's demonstrate the effectiveness or the visual appearance of these abilities. So I'll take surprise attack first, and I'll go up to this new target dummy that's in the crown store. Really cool. The same thing as like a normal skeleton. He's got 6 million health or whatever. And I'm just going to bop him in the mouth to surprise attack. So it's a really simplistic animation, and you see these like shedding, sort of. This is the signification that he's been afflicted with major fracture. So it's going to last a really long time. That's 17.6 seconds, as I said, because that's the, or 17.3 is the max. So really, really nice. And then if I enter stealth really quick, and let's say I just go into cloak, and I use this, see how he gets stunned? That's because I was in cloak, so that's the stun duration. We see it lasts quite a long time. 4.6 seconds is nothing to laugh at. Really, really nice. And it's also very easy to weave. I'm lagging, so it doesn't look like that, but it's a very, very simplistic ability to use. Now let's just consume a skill of respect so I can show how fast we move while in stealth. Let's leave combat. Let's use that skill of respec. And then with Shadow Cloak. So here's concealed weapon. Or let's just look. This is how fast I normally move in cloak. So you can't sprint in cloak. It'll break if you try. So a decent amount of movement speed, but nothing fancy. But now let's morph into concealed weapon. And now I activate it, and we notice I'm much, much faster. So this is without Major Expedition. It will stack with that and other sources. Like if I had medium armor, I'd be much, much quicker in there, like if I was an orc too. So yeah, concealed weapons movement speed bonus is really, really strong. I believe it does scale with rank up to 25%, so also keep that in mind. Next ability we have is Shadow Cloak, which is a utility skill, and it's going to last 2.9 seconds with our Dark Veil passive. So let's just pump some points in there really quick to demonstrate that. So yeah, 2.9 seconds, and what this is going to do is it's a very simplistic skill. It's going to cloak ourselves in shadow, as we just saw in the demonstration, where we become invisible for 2.9 seconds. So I just activate the skill, and for 2.9 seconds with the Dark Veil passive, I am undetectable by most enemies. Now, in PvE content like trials or boss dungeons, a lot of these things have something that I refer to as true sight, which is the ability to detect through stealth regardless of any, there's like no special parameters needed. They just have the ability to see you in stealth no matter what, no matter how far away you are, etc., etc. It's true sight. It disables the ability to stealth. It's a little bit different than like a guard with mage light. They don't have true sight, but like in a trial, everything has true sight. You can't sneak around. They're going to instantly detect you because you're not you're not hidden in stealth. That little eyeball that shows up, if you try using this in a lot of PvE content, it's going to remain open such as that. So like if I was sitting right here and I tried to stealth, it tells me, hey, I can't do that, I'm detected. So it would be the same thing in PvE content, which really hurts the rogue aspect of stamina and magic and Nightblades in PvE, because we don't have that option. But in PvP or overland content, where their mobs are a lot easier, they don't have these special rules, we're going to be able to traverse the battlefield being undetected. So getting nodes a little bit easier if you're a craft or something silly like that. Or going through Cyrodiil, or especially Imperial City, you're going to be able to be one hard-to-track cookie because you just have the ability to readily enter stealth at your whim. Granted, it does cost magicka. It will not disable our magicka regeneration, so if you have a high enough mag regen, you'll be able to stay in this indefinitely. However, things will break Cloak. AoE abilities. Anytime you take damage from an AoE skill, so like ultimates like Dawnbreaker or Bats or Banner, all AoE damage, this will break. Passive AoE damage, so like a Sork's Hurricane, or let's say another Blade's Path of Darkness, this will also break Cloak. Otherwise, direct damage, so like Shulks from Wardens, or Steel Tornado, or Sap Essence, all of these are AoEs and will instantly break Cloak. Other sources are direct damage, so things like Haunting Curse, that's direct damage and it's AoE, so it will break Cloak. That's actually one of the easiest counters to Cloak. Detect potions will also allow the user or consumer of the potion to detect you in Cloak regardless. Mage Light, which is a detect skill from the Mage's Guild skill line, will allow you to reveal. So if I cast this and it reveals someone in stealth, when I activate that, they're not going to be able to stealth. The same thing can be done with Expert Hunter and Morphs from the Fighters Guild, and there are other skills like Revealing Flare from the support skill line. So if I hit an enemy that's stealthed or invisible, they can't return to stealth or invisibility for 3 seconds. So as a Nightblade, we have to look out for these skills and these ways to counter us, because with them, we instantly become dead. If we get caught out of stealth and we're not able to enter it, we're going to be taking a high amount of damage and likely will not survive the situation. So be very cautious when that is happening. It's the easiest way to counter gank builds and just Nightblades in general, is using one of those skills I referred to, Detect Potions, or just spamming AoEs. There's a lot of counters to these abilities. Furthermore, it's going to be kind of buggy. Sometimes it's not going to work. It sucks. It's aggravating, but hey, shit happens. You got to make utilization out of it when you can. But now let's look at our morphs. Our first morph is called Shadowy Disguise, and all this does is within the next 3 seconds of you activating a damaging ability or damage source, so like a light attack, a heavy attack, you're guaranteed to get a critical strike regardless of it uses magicka or stamina to scale. So it'll give 100% weapon and spell crit rating while you are in this duration for the 3 seconds. If you activate it with a channel and it breaks, that will actually not get the bonus. So that's one thing that's really obnoxious. Utilizing this with a channeled cost or something will not grant that 100% crit because you are breaking Cloak, and it doesn't work as well. So like I've tried using this with Lethal Arrow and it's really finicky. Sometimes I do get the crit, however I don't have 0% crit, so I could say it's that, and sometimes I don't get a crit. So Shadowy Disguise is not as coherent as it states. It doesn't follow the same rules. It's not like this duration that we get, more so while we're in Cloak. But it's still very powerful, especially when used in tandem with like Concealed Weapon or Surprise Attack, a guaranteed crit that sets off balance, all that great. However, Shadowy Disguise, if you're using a weapon crit ability, if you're from Sneak, it's already going to crit. There is not super high advantages of Shadowy Disguise, but it will allow us to get a lot of crit rating in combat. But now let's move to our next morph, which is Dark Cloak. This is another very simple ability, but what happens is after we activate it, we're going to get minor protection for the next 2 seconds. So it's going to help reduce any damage we take by 8% for 2 seconds. Now, I really don't like this morph because the base idea of Cloak is when we have damage over time or a ranged attack is coming to us and we activate Cloak, we will nullify the effects. So if a dot is ticking on us, let's say someone puts Poison Injection on me, I can enter Cloak, and if Poison Injection ticks, it will not break Cloak. Cloak will suppress that damage over time. So gaining minor protection isn't going to help against dots. And let's say someone throws a Crystal Frag at me from a range. I enter Cloak, Crystal Frag will miss me most of the time if it's not broken, but it's going to help shrug off range damage, so it's not going to really help getting this minor protection. Now, there are a lot of skills that will go through Cloak, so like if someone's using a Detect Pot, that 8% will help, but still, usually if we're being caught, we're going to die anyways, so 8% damage mitigation isn't going to really save us. So I'm sure there are great uses for this skill that I haven't really thought about and that other PvPers might suggest, but I always use Shadowy Disguise regardless of stamina or magicka in PvE or in PvP context. And in PvE, we can't really use these skills unless we're like doing Dark Brotherhood dailies or Thieves Guild or something like that where we're just stealing and stuff. So from an endgame PvE DPS context, useless. From an RP context, great. From a PvP context, even better. So it's a decent skill, but I would like to see something happen to it to help kind of PvE. I want to play like a rogue, or like a shapeshifter, sort of, like a magic and Nightblade who's able to utilize the shadows, or a stamina Nightblade who's very sneaky, like stuff like that. I can't use it in PvE. Sucks, but hey, maybe we'll see something happen. Next ability is Path of Darkness. This is an AoE damage over time skill. It's very, very nice. It's going to cost Magicka, so it'll scale with max Magicka, spell damage, spell critical, and spell penetration as it deals magic damage. Furthermore, in the CP system, it's going to scale with spell erosion, elemental expert, elfborn, and thaumaturge as it is damage over time. Very simplistic skill. All you do is you cast it, and it's going to create a corridor of shadows. It's like a small rectangle that deals X magic damage to enemies inside the target area for every 1 second. Furthermore, while you are on the path, you gain Major Expedition, increasing your movement speed by 30% for up to 2 seconds after leaving it. So I simply cast this ability. We see the little woogey red-black smoke kind of emanating from the ground. If an enemy is standing in that, they're going to take damage. And if I move in it, I'm going to grant myself Major Expedition. We see I get it, and then even after I leave, I'm going to still retain that Major Expedition. So here, I'm moving, I don't have Major Expedition, I move in, I move out, and I still get it for about 2 seconds. So it's going to give us a little bit of freedom to come in and out, helping our mobility a lot. So really simplistic skill. In terms of DPS, Path of Darkness itself isn't going to be astronomical. However, we will have morph options that will help this. Now, Stamina Nightblades will not have access to this skill usually because it does not scale with stamina. So unless you're playing a kind of wonky support skill or build, you're not going to get much efficiency out of this skill line. So unfortunate, but we have easier sources of Major Expedition, like if you're using a bow, when you dodge roll, or a speed potion, something of the sort. So we don't really need this. And furthermore, for Magic and Nightblades even, we have a very powerful skill from Siphoning called Cripple, which will grant us Major Expedition for 8 seconds instead of this 13 seconds. So Path of Darkness lasts 11, so if I sit in it for the full duration, that's 11 seconds. 2 more, I get an additional 2 seconds. So Path of Darkness, with that extra duration from Dark Veil and the ability to leave for up to 2 seconds, it's going to last a bit, but we're kind of confined to that area. But now let's look at our morphs. Our first morph is called Twisting Path, and this is going to retain all the scaling stuff. And previously, before Morrowind, this actually used to scale with direct damage. It was a bug. It has been fixed, so it no longer scales with Master at Arms. It does not proc Scathing Mage. There's no fancy stuff to it anymore. It simply scales with Thaumaturge. So it'll still proc Valken, Scoria, stuff that requires dots, all that. But it has seen a quite large damage increase. So what we get out of Twisting Path is it's going to affect a conal area. So instead of just being this small rectangle, it's going to be this large cone in front of us. I'll demonstrate that in a second. And it's going to increase the damage. We see a little bit more than 200 damage out of this skill, so it's going to have much more efficient scaling with max Magicka and spell damage. It's going to get more out of those, so it's very, very powerful for Magicka DPS in PvE context because we're all about DPS. So this is our AoE damage over time ability. Very strong, very simplistic. It's going to cost a lot of Magicka, however, because it does have that 11.5 second duration. However, my major issue with this ability is that it lasts 11 seconds, but it lasts 11.5 seconds, but it deals damage in 1 second intervals. So that 0.5 seconds that we're gaining out of Dark Veil is literally useless to us because we're not gaining anything out of it. So the base is 10 seconds and then Dark Veil is 15. So instead of becoming like rounding up to 12, it just becomes 11.5, but those 0.5 seconds are useless to us as DPS, so I would really like to just see like 0.5 seconds added to this, so it was on a whole integer, so we didn't have to worry about recasting it at an awkward time, because you have to recast this ability before it fades, because you have that 0.5 second window where it's not doing any damage. So if you're trying to optimize and keep your damage up, you need to recast at 11 seconds, not after it falls off. But still, see, does a lot of damage, will usually be in our top 5. If we're in AoE, it'll probably be 1 or 2 in our damage recap because it is very, very powerful if utilized properly. So I'll just take this really quick, and we see it's much bigger. It has a conal effect instead of just a little triangle or a little rectangle. So instead of just being in this line I walk in, it kind of gains this little arch on the sides, helping it cleave to more targets, hitting larger groups of enemies. So really, really nice. Now let's consume that skill of respec again. So the other morph is called Refreshing Path. Still going to deal damage. It's going to deal the same as Path of Darkness. And furthermore, the damaging portion will literally be referred to as Path of Darkness. It is the same ability in damage. However, it's going to add another effect on it. So on top of that major expedition, while we or our allies are standing inside of it, we will be healed for roughly the same amount of damage that it would cause. So 474 magic damage, and it heals for 424. So really, really helpful in helping the Magicka Nightblade, Tank Nightblade, whatever, give some healing to not only themselves, but the group. It's going to apply to everyone. So I can just cast this skill, and we see Refreshing Path will tick. It can crit. It happens every 1 second. So it can provide a lot of self-healing. And it's really, really strong for like a solo player who needs the healing, like a Magicka Nightblade in Maelstrom Arena. Just learning Maelstrom. Really great skill in Overland content. In PvP, it's really strong to kind of help sit in here like, hey, you want to fuck with me? Come sit in my damage while I'm also being healed. I have major expedition. It's really, really helpful in some of these skirmishes as a Magicka Nightblade in PvP. So there is a lot of usefulness out of this, and it helps the very different Healer Nightblade or Tank Nightblade. They're not very meta, but they can utilize this skill, which gives them some added utility, which will help them out quite a bit in terms of importance and group functions. So really strong for primarily 4-man content because it will have a 6-person target cap for the healing. Furthermore, that health or the healing portion is not going to scale with the same stuff. It's only going to scale with Blessed because it's healing done, so allies will get this bonus. Elfborn whenever it crits. Not going to scale with anything else in here, but when we move into the red tree, it will also scale for ourselves for quick recovery, and if an ally has quick recovery, it will also scale for them with that. So those are the 3 nodes that it scales with for the healing portion of it. It's going to stack with other % healing amps, so like heavy armor has some healing amps, major minor mending, you're going to get more out of it. So it's quite powerful, especially on like a Magicka Nightblade build. So very, very nice. Some added utility, helping the Nightblade bring a little bit of flavor to the table. Now, we move on to our next skill, which is called Aspect of Terror. And this is a utility skill that operates as crowd control. Very simplistic. It's going to scale with max magicka or cost max magicka, but it will not scale with anything. There's no way to increase the duration out of these except the Dark Veil's passive. We see that 4 seconds becomes 4.5. The movement speed reduction will not scale with Dark Veil. So very, very simplistic. It's going to cost a lot of magicka. This is not meant to be spammed. It has a 6 meters AoE radius, one of the very few AoE CCs in the game. And the best thing about Aspect of Terror is it inflicts fear, and fear ignores block. And that is a very, very helpful tool in PvP. So in PvE, not going to be using this skill at all. There's no advantage to helping or to allow mobs to run around like headless chickens. They're going to move out of your ground dots. They're going to move around, forcing your melee DPS to go and have to chase them. Don't use this skill in PvE. But in PvP, it's very, very helpful, especially when dealing with healers and tanks, because what do those fuckers do? They permanently block. They don't ever let go of their right click. They sit here like this. That's all they do. So, what do we have to combat that? Fear. We walk in when they don't expect it, a lot of times with cloak out of stealth or something of the sort, and we instantly fear them, and we line up burst with ourselves and our allies especially, allowing us to do a deceptive amount of damage to even tank builds when utilized properly. So Aspect of Terror is a phenomenal skill. It's going to enable so much offensive and defensive play in PvP, because on top of having that fear, which will affect up to 2 enemies for that 4.5 seconds, but it's also going to reduce their movement speed by 50% for 4 seconds. So it's going to help root them in place, make them unable to run around. If you need some added mobility, like, oh no, they turned around, they CC broke, and they're trying to dump their Dawnbreaker or their Eye of the Storm or whatever, you're able to get away from them because they have this really hefty snare on them. So it's a really great skill. And it's going to get even better with morphs. So our first morph is called Mass Hysteria, and what this is going to do is instead of only affecting 2 enemies, it will affect up to 3. So we're going to have an AoE CC, a fear, that lasts 4.5 seconds for up to 3 targets that ignores block. I love this skill. Mass Hysteria is wonderful. On top of getting added AoE utility, we're also going to apply Minor Maim for that 4-second movement speed duration, reducing the damage that that target deals for 15% for that 4-second duration. So this is a wonderful little buffer to help give us some defenses for ourselves and our allies if we're not using Minor Maim in our kit. So this is great. A lot of times my healer is being pressured in like a Battleground or Cyrodiil or Imperial City or whatever, and they need help. So what I do is I immediately run in to fear opponents off of them so that they can't keep up the pressure. They get a little bit of time to get their stamina back so they don't have to block, etc. And furthermore, when this CC ends or they CC break, they're going to get that Minor Maim, making them deal even less damage. So it's a really, really great defensive and offensive skill to utilize. I love this skill. I suggest using this on any build you're using in PvP because fear is just wonderful. It's really frustrating to deal with because it ignores block. You're kind of locked into a little bit of a duration where you scream around because your character is fleeing in terror. So like they run around, they put their hands on their head, they're screaming, and you're locked into that animation for about half a second before you can CC break. So it is kind of frustrating, but it is very, very powerful to be utilizing. Next, we have Manifestation of Terror, and this is a very, very unique skill, and it's going to rework how it operates in general. So I'm going to take this because I'm going to demonstrate, because Mass Hysteria looks the same as the base morph when we saw that. I just casted it, little ethereal tethers came out of me, and it feared anyone near me. Manifestation of Terror will, instead of casting it around us, so like a 6 meters AoE, we're going to have the ability to place it at a range. And that sounds weird, but it's because it doesn't fear right away. What this does is it places a trap on the ground that if an enemy walks over, they will be feared. And if they walk, so it's going to place at the place that I use it, as well as where I casted it from. So I'm going to place down 2 traps. So I have double the AoE potential. However, it'll only hit up to 2 enemies, but if a group walks over this, Mass Hysteria affected 3, this will affect 4, because there are 2 different things, and I can overlap them. So if I have a big group of players coming towards me, and there are 4 of them, if I use Mass Hysteria, 3 out of the 4 are crowd-controlled. But if I did this, and I casted it next to me, and then I backed up, boom, now 4 people will be feared as they walk towards me. So they last 37.5 seconds, so they last a very long time. You can use it as a trap, lay in wait for your prey sort of to come around. But they take 3 seconds to arm. So if you need reactive CC, you're not gonna get it. You have to cast this. Wait, 1, 2, 3, boom! They start emanating this black dust. Now they are primed and ready to fear. So you're not gonna have that reactive fear from Mass Hysteria. So that is the one disadvantage. But what it's gonna do if they walk on it, they're gonna get feared for 4 seconds. It's not going to scale in duration like the other one because it has that range component. And they're still going to have that movement speed reduction, but they will not have Minor Maim. So it's a really powerful but unique skill that requires the user to understand how to utilize it. It's a very underrated morph, but it works so well, especially when you're fighting in crowded areas where an enemy has to walk through like a tight corridor, so like Battlegrounds in Arcane University, or Imperial City, or like a resource in Cyrodiil. So if I'm fighting at the farm and there's a huge group on the flag and I'm sitting inside the tower, I can place this a little bit in front, like by the stairs, and then right on the doorway, so that when they all come through, 4 of them will be crowd controlled, and it's going to give me the ability to peel off a little better, or to go in. They're not going to be blocking. So if I drop ultimates with allies, they're just going to get annihilated. So really, really helpful skill. Brings a lot of utility and uniqueness to the table for Nightblades. So yeah, Dark Veil again will not increase that duration of the fear. That I believe that might be a bug. So the other one lasted 4.5 seconds. This is just 4 seconds. So hopefully that gets fixed. Just give Manifestation of Terror a little bit more utility. In our last skill from our active abilities is called Summon Shade, and this is a very simplistic skill. What we do is we cast this little thing, and it's going to summon a little dude or a little shade entity that will follow us around depending on the morph we take, which will attack the enemy. Now, it's going to scale with max magicka only because he is a pet, so he's not going to scale with spell damage. He's not going to scale with your penetration. He's not going to inherit your critical hit damage. He is by all means a pet, so he's only going to scale with that max magicka, meaning it's not very effective in terms of a DPS skill. But he's going to deal some pretty moderate damage, or minor damage is what I mean. We see only 320 damage. Refreshing Path does more, and that's not even a damage morph. So yeah, not going to do a lot of DPS, but it will afflict minor maim on the target for 4 seconds after attacking. If we see the base morph is just a little guy, he walks right in and he does basic attacks. So since I'm a Khajiit, he's a Khajiit, he will reflect your race. Pretty cool. He looks nice, and he cannot be targeted. He is not an entity, so he can't be killed. He is kind of derpy though, so he'll like kind of run around sometimes, and he's applying minor maim every strike. We see it refreshes on the duration for 4 seconds, meaning out of the 17.3 seconds, I'm actually getting like 21.3 seconds of minor maim. So it's a very, very efficient source of minor maim to help tank builds, especially, or PvP players keep up minor maim on that target. So there is some decent utility out of that. It will scale with that Dark Veil duration. It will activate Shadow Barrier and all that great stuff. But now let's look at our morphs. So our first morph is called Dark Shades, and what this is going to do is it's going to summon 2 shades instead of just 1. So it's going to effectively double the damage we see here. Summons 2 shades instead of 1. Each of their attacks is going to deal the same damage, so you get double the DPS out of it. Still not going to be that great as a DPS skill. They are melee, so they can be kited. They are kind of slow. They're not going to be super fast like other pets or something of the sort, so they're not going to be like Speedy Gonzalez, Mauve the Infernal, running around breathing fire, doing crazy DPS. They're kind of slow. They're decent, but yeah, minor maim. I use this on my tank build usually, or like a support build in Cyrodiil. But most of the times, we're going to be using the other morph, which is called Shadow Image. And what this does is it's going to make the shade that we summon into a archer instead of a melee build. So we already saw Summon Shade. Dark Shades, there's just 2 of them. There's nothing fancy with that. So I'll take Summon Shade to demonstrate. And what this does is it's going to summon the same guy, and I cast it, but he summons as an archer. Still a Khajiit because I'm a Khajiit, but he's not going to move. He does not have the ability to move. So if I move 20 feet away, he's just going to sit here, chill out, and pelt my target wherever I casted it, with damage. But I'm also going to gain the ability to teleport to this target. So there's a lot of utility with this skill and a lot of really cool, interesting gameplay. So my target's still over there. He's still dealing with that buddy, but I can instantly activate this and teleport back to him, traversing a huge amount of distance. I do believe it has a cap in terms of distance, so we'll move super far away. But if I come too far away, I can't activate and teleport back to him. It's kind of buggy where it's like, oh, you're out of range. You're not going to be able to teleport back. So there is an effective range on it. I believe it is 28 meters. So you have to keep that in mind. 28 meters from your little dude bro. So keep that in mind that if you do outrange it, you're not going to be able to teleport like there again. Still out of range, so you have to be close enough to him to be able to teleport back. But it offers so much utility. Yeah, 28 meters for AoE radius that we can go back to our target, activate to just go back to him. Really, really strong. Helps in PvP so much. You can do a lot of really cool stuff with this. Furthermore, that damage that he deals will be increased by about 50% of the base. So instead of, like, Dark Shades is double damage, but Shadow Image does get that a little bit more DPS out of it. So there is some added utility. Usable on Stamina, Magica Nightblades, Tank Nightblades, whatever it is, in Cyrodiil, and even in PvP, or on my Tank Nightblade in PvE, I'll sometimes use Shadow Image to, like, go pull a target, and then I'll move around a corner so they'll all line of sight to me, group up really nice, and I can teleport back to, like, move into order. So, like, if let's say there's a group of Daedra over there. So I pulled with Shadow Image, and they're all coming to me. And as soon as they reach that target, I'm going to go in and crowd control them with, like, a soul tether, or start taunting them or whatever. So there is some utility in PvE as well. It's a really cool skill. It's a blast to use. You can do so much with this. I love it. I love it. I love it. The only thing I would do with this in Dark Shades is allow them to scale better with damaging stats. Because remember, it does not scale the same way that other things will. So, like, let's say I increase my spell damage. So let's just go to the bank really quick and check on that. Yeah, so even though my spell damage went up, I'm at 1571 with a greatsword. Going to do 427 magic damage, and then if I lose some spell damage, like I put on a bow or whatever, it's going to stay the same. So even though I lost roughly 200 spell damage, it's still staying at 427 magic damage because it only scales with max Magica. So yeah, unfortunate in terms of DPS production, not going to be that great, but yeah, it's not meant to be used as a DPS skill. It's meant as utility. But let's move on to our last ability, which is Consuming Darkness. This is our ultimate. It's going to cost a whopping 200 ultimate, so it can be quite pricey. It's going to last 15.5 seconds in terms of duration. I believe when we morph this and get it to rank 4, it will go up to about 17 seconds. We'll check when we get there. But it has a 5 meters AoE radius. Lasts again 15.5 seconds with that Dark Veil passive, and what it's going to do is it conjures a ring of shadows around you, edgy, haha, reducing movement speed of enemies inside of it by 70% for that duration. So it's going to make them move really, really slow. Plus, while you and your allies, up to 5 allies, or 6 targets in total, yourself and 5 allies, or 6 allies, they will grant themselves major protection while standing in it. So if they leave, they're going to lose it. If another target comes in, they'll take it. And yeah, 30% damage mitigation across the board. Very, very powerful. A very defensive ultimate. Great, great, great in PvE. Not so much in PvP because you can kind of just walk out of it. You can negate it. It's easy to see, stuff like that. But it's not going to deal damage at base. It's also going to have an additional effect while... If an enemy is, or if an ally is low health and they are in the area, they can activate a synergy referred to as Hidden Refresh. It's going to allow them to become invisible for about 4 seconds. It's going to give them 50% movement speed, which will stack with other movement speeds in the game, and it will heal them for a lot of health over 4-second duration. So that health is going to scale with our stats. If we see, I just swapped to my dual wield bar. That 22k is now, or it's now 22k, and on my bow bar it was only 21k. So it's gonna, as it's an ultimate, it's gonna scale with stamina, weapon damage, weapon critical, or max magica, spell damage, spell critical. It's not gonna deal any damage. It will scale in the CP system with, again, blessed, elfborn, and where is it? Quick recovery. So those are all the sources to increase it. So when we look at our morphs, we have the first morph, which is called Bolstering Darkness. It's going to increase the duration because that the range is going up, or the rank is going up, rather. So we do see that rank will increase in duration. I'll take one of these morphs to demonstrate. Since they both look the same, there's not going to be much. I'll just take Veil when we get there. But it's going to retain that same stuff, major protection, 70% AoE, snare, really, really strong. Same ultimate cost, 5 meters AoE. But on top of it is you will grant yourself, only yourself, an additional 30% damage mitigation, which will stack. So you get really, really tanking and bolstering darkness. If you pop this in PvE or PvP, you're going to be one tough cookie to kill. You're going to be really tanky because you just have insane damage mitigation, major protection, and an additional 30% that stacks. Same synergy stuff. If an ally gets low health, they can activate it, heal, scales with all the same stuff. Really, really straightforward. Need more ultimate to demonstrate our Veil of Blades when I get there. Drink a potion, get some ultimate. But now we move on to Veil of Blades. And this is, I'll just take this one because this is the one we'll be using. We see that that duration does go up. So Bolstering Darkness or Veil of Blades will both go up to 17.8 seconds in duration with both of our Dark Veil passive. Still costs 200 ultimate, 5 meters AoE. But on top of having that snare and major protection for you in 5 allies, it'll also deal magic damage every 1 second in the duration. So it'll last, it's going to deal 17 sources of damage because it deals damage in 1 second intervals. It lasts 17.8, so another issue of, hey, we're not getting that extra free damage out of it. Unfortunate, I really wish it would just go up to 18 seconds instead, so we got 1 more damage tick out of it, but whatever. This is not meant to be used as a DPS ultimate primarily. You can utilize it if you need some damage mitigation as well as some damage, so this is what I'll suggest for most groups who are progressing through like hard mode for the first time or really struggling with a fight or an encounter. Major protection is a great way to survive through a lot of damage in the game, and you're going to get some DPS out of it. So Magic and Nightblades or Stamina Nightblades even can utilize this skill to help their group bring that utility and deal some damage at the same time. It's still going to have that hidden refresh passive to it, or that synergy. It's not that great, but it is a little bit of extra utility. But yeah, Veil of Blades, really simplistic. We're going to see I cast it down, plop it down, makes this really cool effect, deals damage every 1 second. It's going to scale with my weapon crit at the moment because my stamina is higher, so it's scaling with stamina, weapon damage, weapon critical. If my magicka was higher, it would scale with magicka, spell critical, and spell damage. However, since it deals magic damage, it will always use spell penetration. And furthermore, since it's magic damage, it's always going to use the same CP nodes, Spell Erosion, Elemental Expert, Elfborn, and Thaumaturge as it is damage over time. So keep that in mind. Even if you're a stamina build, it will use those nodes. It's why it's not that great, especially as a stamina DPS. But hey, major protection for 17.8 seconds is nothing to laugh at. It lasts a very long time. You're very tanky, but you are confined to this area. So keep that in mind. It's not super OP. In PvP, it can be negated. Enemies can simply just not walk in it, but you can place it if you need some damage mitigation and you know, hey, that enemy sort just wasted his negate or he threw a Nova or whatever, so keep that in mind. But that pretty much covers everything in the Shadow skill line. There was a lot of stuff to discuss here. Sorry that I went on for so long, but there was a lot of really cool, interesting interactions with these skills. I did miss a little thing in Veiled Strike. It does set the enemy off balance. I forgot to comment on what that officially means. So off balance means a target will be not crowd controlled, but they'll be primed to. So in against a target, if I use this out of stealth, let's see, just get Shadow Cloak on my bar really quick. If I utilize this, we see this stun, and we see that little dizzying sigil next to the surprise attack mark in the debuff section. That was off balance. And what that does is the next heavy attack against that target will deal 70% more damage. So it's a really great way to utilize, especially in PvP. If you come out of stealth, you do a surprise attack, do a heavy attack right after, you're going to do monstrous damage. So I can just kind of demonstrate here. I do a heavy attack, boom, it hits for about 6.2k with a crit. So now what I can do is I can go in stealth, use surprise attack, do a heavy track. We see that it gets consumed, and my heavy attack now does not crit, but does more damage than my crit because that 70% bonus modifier to it. Furthermore, enemies that are off balance, if you have the CP node for it, Exploiter, you'll deal 10% more damage to them across the board for the duration. So let's just do some light attacks here. So we see 1422, 2.4k crit. Now if I enter invisibility, do this. Now if I do that, he's taking extra damage from major fracture, and I'm just doing more damage. So after off balance fades, my damage goes down. So 10% across the board, and remember 70% on the next heavy attack. So a really great way to utilize this. Enter cloak, surprise attack, dual wield heavy attack. Boom, you're going to be able to do a tremendous amount of damage. Keep in mind, I'm not, like, I have no passives or anything else, so my damage looks really weak, but you're going to be able to do a lot of burst in PvP, and in PvE, if you're somehow able to do that in PvE, you'll apply off balance for 4.6 seconds. So a nice little utility skill, etc. But yeah, that covers everything for this skill line. Hope you guys enjoyed. Next will be siphoning, and then we'll start moving into other classes. But until then, I will see you guys around. Videos like this one are made possible by the amazing support from these phenomenal people. Between my life, the game, and everything in between, I'd never be able to do as much as I can without them. Thank you to everyone for the empowerment, regardless from financial or in-game support, constructive feedback, or simple encouragement. You are all amazing.